Thunder cracked overhead like artillery fire. Jack Kincaid wiped grease from his hands with a shop rag, watching the storm through the windows of his auto repair bay. The rain hammered against the metal roof of Kincaid's garage, drowning out the usual sounds of Briar Ridge, settling into another quiet October evening. T-35. Jack had built something solid here. The garage turned a decent profit, his regulars trusted him, and he'd earned respect in this small Ohio town, without having to explain much about the years he'd spent fixing Humvees in places that didn't exist on any tourist maps. Those days were behind him. Now he fixed what people needed fixed and went home to his small apartment above the shop. The front door chimed. Jack looked up from the engine block he'd been cleaning, expecting to see Mrs. Patterson coming to pick up her Buick. Instead, Mason stood in the doorway. Brooks' 8-year-old son was soaked through, his Superman t-shirt plastered to his skinny chest. Water dripped from his dark hair onto the concrete floor. The kid's eyes were wide with panic. "Uncle Jack." Mason's voice cracked. "Dad's bleeding. Mom hit him, then she left. Help." Jack dropped the rag. "What happened? Where's your dad?" "At home. There's blood on the kitchen floor. Dad won't wake up." Mason was shaking, from cold or fear or both. Jack grabbed his keys and jacket. "Get in the truck. We're going to your house." He locked up the garage and helped Mason into his pickup. The kid buckled himself in without being asked, something that would have impressed Jack under different circumstances. Now it just made his gut tighten with worry. "Tell me exactly what you saw," Jack said, starting the engine. Mason wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Mom and Dad were fighting in the kitchen. Real loud. She was yelling about money and some guy named Calder. Dad said he was done with her lies." Jack pulled onto the empty street, windshield wipers fighting the rain. "Then what?" Mom grabbed the coffee mug from the counter, the blue one with the chip. She threw it at Dad, but he ducked. Then she picked up the pieces and... Mason's voice got smaller. "She hit him with it. Right here." He touched the side of his head. "Where were you when this happened?" "Upstairs. I heard the crash and came down." Dad was on the floor, and Mom was standing over him with a broken mug in her hand. There was blood everywhere. Jack pressed harder on the gas pedal. Brooks lived on the other side of town, a 15-minute drive that felt like an hour. "What did your mom do then?" "She saw me and dropped the pieces. She said Dad fell and hit his head, but I saw what really happened. Then she grabbed her purse and her phone and left. She didn't even check if Dad was okay." Jack turned onto Maple Street. Brooks' house sat at the end of the block, a modest 2-story with a red front door that Delaney had insisted on painting last spring. Jack had helped Brooks with that project, wondering even then why she cared so much about appearances when she barely seemed to care about anything else. The driveway was empty. Delaney's silver Honda was gone. Jack parked and they ran through the rain to the front door. Mason had left it unlocked in his rush to find help. Jack pushed it open and stepped into the front hallway. "Brooks," he called out. "Brooks, where are you?" "Kitchen," came a weak voice. Jack found his younger brother sitting on the floor with his back against the dishwasher. Brooks was conscious but pale, one hand pressed to the left side of his head. Blood had dried on his fingers and stained his work shirt. Broken pieces of blue ceramic were scattered across the tile floor. "Jesus, Brooks, what the hell happened?" "Delaney lost it." Brooks looked up at Jack with unfocused eyes. "I confronted her about the phone calls. About Calder. She went crazy." Jack knelt down beside his brother. The gash on Brooks' temple was deep enough to need stitches, maybe worse. "We need to get you to the hospital." "No hospitals. I'm fine. You're bleeding from your head, and you can barely sit up straight." "We're going to hospital." Jack pulled out his phone. "Mason, go upstairs and pack a bag. You're staying with me tonight." He dialed 911 while Mason's footsteps pounded up the stairs. 911, what's your emergency?" "I need an ambulance at 1247 Maple Street. My brother's been assaulted. He has a head injury and he's lost some blood." "Is the attacker still on the premises?" "No. She left about an hour ago." "She?" Jack looked at Brooks, who nodded weakly. "His wife attacked him with a broken coffee mug. Then she took off. An ambulance is on the way. Please stay on the line." Jack pocketed the phone when he heard sirens approaching. The paramedics were efficient and professional, asking questions Jack couldn't answer and questions Brooks answered in slow, careful words. They loaded him onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. I'm riding with him, Jack told the lead paramedic. Are you family? I'm his brother. And his emergency contact. Mason climbed into Jack's truck with a stuffed backpack. Is Dad going to be okay? Jack started the engine, following the ambulance's flashing lights through the rain-soaked streets. Your dad's tough. He's going to be fine. But as they drove toward Briar Ridge General Hospital, Jack couldn't shake the image of Brooks sitting on that kitchen floor, blood on his face and defeat in his eyes. Delaney had done more than just hurt him physically. She'd broken something that might not heal as easily as a head wound. The emergency room at Briar Ridge General smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Jack sat in the waiting area with Mason, watching the kid color in a book the nurse had given him. It was past 9 o'clock, and Mason should have been in bed, but there was nowhere else for him to go. A doctor in green scrubs approached them. Mr. Kincaid? I'm Dr. Reeves. Your brother is going to be fine. We've given him 12 stitches and a CT. Skin shows no sign of serious brain injury. He has a concussion, so we'd like to keep him overnight for observation. Can I see him? In a few minutes. The police are with him right now. Jack had called the police from the hospital parking lot. Officer Martinez, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and tired eyes, had taken a statement while Brooks was being treated. Now she walked over from the direction of the patient rooms. Mr. Kincaid, I've just finished speaking with your brother. He's confirmed what you told me about the assault. She pulled out a small notebook. Do you know where Mrs. Kincaid might have gone? No idea. Her car was gone when we got to the house. We've put out a Bolo alert for her vehicle. The toll cameras on Highway 76 picked up her Honda leaving town eastbound at 7:23 p.m. That's about 45 minutes before you arrived at the house. Jack checked his watch. Delaney had a 2-hour head start, maybe more. What happens next? We'll investigate this as a domestic assault. If we can locate Mrs. Kincaid, we'll bring her in for questioning. Your brother will need to decide if he wants to press charges. Officer Martinez closed her notebook. Mr. Kincaid, I'll be honest with you. Without a weapon or more serious injuries, this might not go very far through the system. A good lawyer could argue it was self-defense or an accident. My nephew saw the whole thing. His mother attacked his father with a broken coffee mug. I understand that. But an 8-year-old witness, it's complicated. We'll do our best. After the officer left, Jack took Mason down to the cafeteria for a sandwich and a Coke. The kid ate without much appetite, stealing glances at the adults around them, like he was waiting for the next bad thing to happen. Uncle Jack, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did Mom hurt Dad? They fight sometimes, but she never hit him before. Jack set down his coffee cup. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes people you trust turn out to be strangers? That sometimes the person who's supposed to love you most is the one who hurts you worst? I don't know, buddy. People do things that don't make sense sometimes. Is she coming back? I don't know that either. Mason nodded like this was the answer he'd expected. Smart kid. Too smart, maybe. They went back upstairs to see Brooks. He was awake and alert, sitting up in the hospital bed with a thick bandage covering the left side of his head. The color had returned to his face. Hey, Dad. Mason climbed into the chair beside the bed. Hey there, Superman. You okay? I'm fine. Uncle Jack's taking care of me. Brooks looked at Jack over Mason's head. Thanks. Don't mention it. The brothers talked quietly while Mason dozed in the chair. Brooks filled in the details of the fight with Delaney, the accusations he'd made about her phone calls, her violent reaction when he'd mentioned Calder by name. Who is this Calder guy? Jack asked. I don't know, but she's been talking to him almost every night after she thinks I'm asleep. Always in whispers, always secretive. When I asked her about it tonight, she said I was being paranoid. Maybe you should have been paranoid sooner. Brooks managed a weak smile. Yeah, maybe. The next morning, Jack drove Mason to school and tried to explain to the principal why the kid might be distracted. Mrs. Henderson was understanding and promised to keep an eye on him. Jack left his phone number and headed back to the garage. Around noon, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number he didn't recognize. Kincaid's garage. Jack, this is Ivy Hoyt, Delaney's sister. Jack hadn't spoken to Ivy in months. She lived in Columbus and rarely visited, which had always struck him as odd since she and Delaney had seemed close when Brooks first started dating her. What can I do for you, Ivy? I heard about what happened last night. I wanted to check on Brooks. He's recovering. Where's your sister? There was a pause. I don't know. But Jack, I think there are things you don't understand about this situation. Such as, Brooks has been drinking heavily. He's been unstable for weeks. Delaney called me last month, crying, saying she feared for her life. Jack set down the wrench he'd been holding. That's bullshit, and you know it. Is it? When was the last time you really spent time with your brother? When was the last time you saw him sober? Brooks doesn't have a drinking problem. Delaney said he's been threatening her. Said he found her phone and accused her of cheating. She was scared, Jack. What happened last night? Maybe it was self-defense. Jack thought about Mason's account of the fight. About Brooks sitting on the kitchen floor, confused and bleeding. About Delaney standing over him with broken ceramic in her hand. Your sister attacked my brother with a weapon and then ran. That's not self-defense, that's assault. I'm just saying there might be two sides to this story. Yeah? Well, I know which side I believe. Jack hung up. Ivy's call bothered him more than it should have. Not because he believed her, but because it showed how carefully Delaney had been laying groundwork for this moment. You don't build an alibi overnight. He drove to the hospital during his lunch break to check on Brooks. His brother was being discharged, signing paperwork with his left hand because his right side was still shaky from the concussion. How are you feeling? Like I got hit in the head with a coffee mug. Brooks managed a grim smile. Thanks for taking care of Mason last night. He's welcome to stay with me as long as you need. It might be a while. I called in sick to work today, and I'm not sure when I'll be up for driving again. They rode back to Brooks' house in silence. Jack helped his brother settle into the living room while they waited for Mason's school bus. The kitchen had been cleaned, but you could still see faint stains on the grout between the tiles. Brooks, I need to ask you something. Ivy called me today. Brooks looked up from the couch. What did she want? She's backing up Delaney's story. Says you've been drinking, threatening your wife, that Delaney was scared of you. That's a lie. I know it is. But why would Ivy lie for her? Brooks was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Those two always had secrets. Even when Delaney and I were dating, they'd have these private conversations that would stop the minute I walked into the room. What kind of secrets? Money mostly. Ivy's always had financial problems. Bad credit. Can't keep a job. Delaney's been helping her out for years. Jack filed this information away. Money made people do stupid things. It also made them loyal to whoever was paying them. That evening, after Mason had gone to bed in Jack's spare room, Jack sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and started making lists. It was something he'd learned in the Army. When facing a problem you don't understand, break it down into pieces you can analyze. What he knew, Delaney had attacked Brooks and fled town. She'd been taking secretive phone calls with someone named Calder. Ivy was lying to protect her. The police weren't treating this as seriously as they should. What he needed to know, who was Calder? Why had Delaney suddenly turned violent? Where had she gone? And most importantly, what was her real plan? Jack had run a business for 5 years. He understood financial motivation better than most people gave him credit for. Delaney's behavior suggested someone who stood to gain something significant for Brooks being hurt or discredited. The next morning, he dropped Mason at school and drove to Brooks' house. His brother was feeling better, the dizziness mostly gone. They sat in the kitchen over breakfast, and Jack asked the questions that had kept him awake. Tell me about your finances. The house, savings, insurance policies. Anything Delaney might have access to. Brooks rubbed his temple, careful not to disturb the bandage. The house is in both our names. We have a joint checking account with maybe $3,000 in it. My life insurance policy names her as the beneficiary, but it's only $50,000. What about Uncle Carl's trust? Uncle Carl had been their mother's brother, a bachelor who'd made good money in the steel industry before he died 3 years ago. He'd left a substantial inheritance to Brooks with specific conditions attached. The trust is worth about $240,000. But I can't touch it until Mason turns 18, unless there's a documented family emergency. And even then, I need to prove financial stability and marriage status to access it early. Marriage status. Carl was old-fashioned. He wanted to make sure the money went to a stable family environment. If Delaney and I divorce, or if something happens to me, the early access provisions become much more complicated. Jack felt pieces clicking into place. Who else knows about the trust conditions? Delaney knows. I had to tell her when we got married. She wasn't happy about not being able to access it immediately. Anyone else? Our lawyer, Jim Morrison. He handled Carl's estate. And Brooks paused. I think Delaney might have mentioned it to Ivy. They talk about everything. After breakfast, Jack drove to Morrison's law office. Jim Morrison was a local attorney in his 60s who'd handled legal work for half the families in Briar Ridge. He was also a customer at Jack's garage, which meant he was willing to answer questions that might have been confidential for someone else. Jack, good to see you. How's Brooks doing? He's recovering. I wanted to ask you about Uncle Carl's trust. Hypothetically, if something happened to Brooks, what would happen to the money? Morrison leaned back in his chair. Hypothetically, if Brooks died, the trust would transfer to Mason with Delaney as guardian until he reached 18. She'd have significant control over how the money was used for Mason's care and education. And if Brooks were declared unfit somehow, that's more complicated. There would need to be court proceedings, psychological evaluations. But if he were deemed unable to care for Mason, custody would likely go to Delaney as the biological mother. Again, that would give her control over the trust funds. What about divorce? In a divorce, Brooks would retain control of the trust, but Delaney would likely be awarded custody of Mason. She could petition for early release of funds for child support purposes. Jack thanked Morrison and left the office with a clearer picture of Delaney's possible motivations. She stood to gain control of $250,000 if Brooks were removed from the equation. But she needed custody of Mason to make it work. His next stop was the garage of Tommy Chun, who serviced most of the police cars in town. Tommy was a gossip who heard everything that happened in law enforcement. Over a shared cigarette, Jack learned that the Bolo alert for Delaney's Honda had been quietly downgraded. No one was actively looking for her anymore. Martinez says the prosecutor's office doesn't think they can make a case stick, Tommy explained. No witnesses except the kid, and you know how juries feel about kids in domestic violence cases. What about the physical evidence? What physical evidence? A broken coffee mug and a head wound that could have come from falling down. Brooks didn't take pictures of the scene before the EMTs cleaned everything up. Jack made another mental note. In the future, he'd know to document everything before calling for help. That afternoon, he picked up Mason from school and took him for ice cream. The kid had been quiet all day, according to his teacher. While Mason worked on a chocolate cone, Jack asked careful questions about his parents' relationship. Did your mom and dad fight about money? Mason nodded. Mom always said Dad wasn't ambitious enough. She wanted to move to a bigger house, and Dad said we couldn't afford it. Did she ever mention wanting to take you somewhere? Maybe for a vacation or to visit family? She talked about moving to Cincinnati. She said she had a friend there who could help her get a better job. Cincinnati, where Calder lived, according to the phone records, Jack had persuaded a friend at the phone company to check. The pieces were coming together, but he needed more evidence before he could act on his suspicions. That evening, Jack called his accountant, Dave Patterson. Dave's wife owned the Buick that Jack serviced, and Dave occasionally helped with the garage's books. More importantly, Dave had connections throughout the local banking community. I need a favor, Dave. Can you find out if someone's been making unusual financial inquiries recently? Specifically about early access to trust funds. That's a pretty specific request, Jack. What's this about? Jack explained the situation without mentioning names. Dave promised to make some discreet inquiries. 2 days later, Dave called back. Your mystery person contacted First National about liquidating a trust fund early. She wanted to know about the documentation required and the timeline for approval. She also asked about transferring assets to accounts outside Ohio. When was this? 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before the fight. Delaney had been planning this for almost a month. Jack's phone rang again that evening. This time it was Brooks. Jack, I found something. In Delaney's jewelry box. She left it behind when she ran. What is it? Bank statements. From an account I didn't know about. She's been transferring money from our joint account to someone named Calder Briggs. $3,000 over the past 2 months. Calder Briggs. Finally, a full name. Jack drove to Brooks' house and examined the statements. The transfers had been made in small amounts, $200 here, $300 there probably to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. but they added up to a significant sum for a family living paycheck to paycheck. I'm going to find this guy, Jack told his brother. What are you going to do when you find him? Jack folded the bank statements and put them in his jacket pocket. I'm going to get answers. Jack spent the weekend doing what the police wouldn't or couldn't do real detective work. He started with the name Calder Briggs and an address in Cincinnati that he'd found in Delaney's hidden paperwork. Monday morning, he called in a favor from Danny Reeves, a guy he'd served with who now worked private security in Columbus. Danny had access to databases that regular citizens couldn't reach. Calder Briggs, age 32, currently on parole for fraud and identity theft, Danny reported over the phone. Did 18 months in Chillicothe Correctional. Got out 6 months ago. His parole officer is Maria Santos in Hamilton County. What kind of fraud? Romance scams, mostly. He'd meet women online, build fake relationships, then convince them to send money or give him access to their accounts. Real piece of work. Jack thanked Danny and hung up. Romance scams. It fit the pattern perfectly. Delaney thought she was using Calder, but more likely he was using her. His next call was to Brooks' lawyer, Jim Morrison. Jim, I need you to do something that might be a little gray area legally. I'm listening. Can you contact Delaney directly? Tell her that Brooks is considering pressing charges, but he might be willing to work something out if she's cooperative. See if she'll meet with you. That's not exactly gray area, Jack. That's entrapment. No, it's not. Brooks really is considering pressing charges, and he might be willing to work something out. I just want to see how she responds. Morrison was quiet for a moment. What are you really after here? I want to know where she is and what she's planning. The police have basically given up, and I don't trust her to stay gone. She's going to come back for Mason, and when she does, I want to be ready. All right, I'll make the call. But if this goes sideways, I never heard any of this from you. Morrison called back that afternoon. Interesting development. Delaney didn't just refuse to meet with me. She hung up the phone when I mentioned Brooks might be willing to negotiate. That's not the response of someone who thinks she's innocent. Did you get a sense of where she was calling from? The number had a Cincinnati area code, and there was background noise, sounded like traffic, maybe construction. She's definitely not hiding out in some remote cabin. Jack made another call, this time to his insurance agent. Sarah Polk had handled policies for half the businesses in Briar Ridge, and she had a reputation for remembering details that other people missed. Sarah, hypothetical question. If someone wanted to file a large insurance claim, say for a house fire or something similar, what kind of documentation would they need? Depends on the policy, but usually proof of ownership, an inventory of damaged property, police reports if applicable. What? Just curious. What about life insurance? How quickly do those claims get processed? Life insurance is trickier. There's usually a waiting period if the death is suspicious. And if there's an ongoing criminal investigation, the insurance company will hold off on paying until that's resolved. Another piece of the puzzle. If Delaney had planned to kill Brooks, she would have known that collecting on his life insurance would take time. The trust fund was a better target immediate access to cash if she could prove she was Mason's sole guardian. That evening, Jack sat in his apartment above the garage and made a timeline. Everything pointed to a carefully planned scheme. 3 weeks ago, Delaney contacts the bank about early trust fund access. 2 months ago, transfers to Calder begin. 1 week ago, Delaney asked Brooks to update his will. Jack stopped writing. Brooks hadn't mentioned anything about updating his will. He called his brother immediately. Brooks, did Delaney ask you to change your will recently? There was a pause. How did you know about that? Yeah, she brought it up about a week ago. Said we needed to update everything since Mason was getting older. She wanted me to make sure the house would go to her if something happened to me. Did you do it? I signed some papers. Delaney said she'd talked to Morrison about it. I didn't really think much about it at the time. Jack felt his stomach drop. Brooks, I don't think Morrison drew up those papers. I think you need to call him right now and find out what you actually signed. 20 minutes later, Brooks called back. His voice was shaky. Jack, Morrison never prepared any will updates. He hasn't heard from Delaney in months. What did the papers look like that you signed? They looked official. Lots of legal language. Delaney said they were just standard updates to reflect our current situation. Do you have copies? Delaney said she'd file everything and get me copies later. Jesus, Jack, what did I sign? I don't know, but we're going to find out. Tomorrow morning, we're going to Morrison's office, and we're going to figure out exactly what documents you put your name on. Jack spent a sleepless night thinking about forged legal documents and identity theft. Calder's specialty, according to his criminal record. The man was good at making fake paperwork look legitimate. The next morning brought another revelation. Mason came downstairs for breakfast and handed Jack a piece of paper. I found this in my backpack. I think Mom put it there. It was a note in Delaney's handwriting. If anything happens to me, make sure Ivy takes care of you. I love you more than you know. Jack stared at the note. It was dated the day before the fight with Brooks. Mason, when did your mom put this in your backpack? I don't know. I just found it this morning when I was looking for my math homework. The note was another piece of evidence that Delaney had been planning something violent. But it also suggested she hadn't expected to survive whatever she was planning. Maybe she'd intended to kill Brooks and then claim self-defense. Maybe she'd planned to make it look like murder-suicide. Jack drove Mason to school and then headed to Morrison's office with the note. The lawyer examined it carefully. This is what we call consciousness of guilt, Morrison explained. She was planning something that she knew might end badly for her. The question is whether this helps Brooks or hurts him. How could it hurt him? If she was genuinely afraid for her life, it supports her self-defense claim. On the other hand, if she was planning to kill him, it shows premeditation. Jack left the law office more frustrated than enlightened. Every piece of evidence seemed to cut both ways. He needed something definitive, something that would prove Delaney's real motives beyond any doubt. The answer came from an unexpected source. Tommy from the police garage called around noon. Jack, you didn't hear this from me, but Martinez got a call this morning from Cincinnati PD. They picked up a woman matching Delaney's description, trying to use a fake passport at the airport. Jack's pulse quickened. Did they arrest her? No, that's the thing. The passport was good enough to fool the TSA agent, but security cameras picked up some inconsistencies. By the time they figured it out, she was gone. But here's the interesting part. She was trying to book a flight to Mexico using the name Delaney Briggs. Briggs. She was already using Calder's last name. Tommy, I need you to do something for me. Can you run a credit check on Calder Briggs? I want to know what kind of financial activity he's had in the past month. I can't officially do that, but I might be able to find someone who can. 2 hours later, Tommy called back with information that changed everything. Your boy Calder has been busy. He opened 3 new credit card accounts in the past month, all using different variations of his name and social security number. Total credit limit of about $20,000. He's also been renting a storage unit in Cincinnati and a mailbox at one of those private postal services. Storage unit for what? That's the million-dollar question. But Jack, there's something else. The credit applications all list the same employment reference, a woman named Delaney Hoyt, who supposedly owns a consulting business in Ohio. Delaney had been helping Calder commit fraud while planning her exit from Briar Ridge. The scope of their partnership was bigger than Jack had realized. That evening, he called Danny Reeves again. Danny, I need you to take a drive to Cincinnati. There's a storage unit I want you to look at, and a guy I want you to keep an eye on. This is getting expensive, Jack. I'll pay whatever it costs. This guy has been scamming my sister-in-law, and now she's used him to hurt my brother. I need to know what they're planning next. All right, give me the details. Jack provided Calder's address and the storage unit information. If Delaney was planning to come back for Mason, there might be evidence of that plan in whatever she and Calder were hiding. Danny called from Cincinnati the next morning with news that Jack had been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. I found your storage unit. Managed to get a look inside through a gap in the door. It's full of boxes, suitcases, and what looks like fake identification documents. There's also a bunch of children's clothes and toys. Children's clothes? Size looks about right for an 8-year-old boy. Jack, they're planning to take the kid. Jack felt cold anger settle in his chest. Planning to kidnap Mason was a line that turned this from a domestic dispute into something much more serious. What about Calder? I followed him to a coffee shop downtown. He's meeting with a woman who matches your description of Delaney. They're at a table by the window if you want to drive down here. I'm on my way. Jack called Brooks and explained the situation. His brother wanted to come along, but Jack convinced him to stay home with Mason. If things went badly in Cincinnati, The kid would need at least one parent who wasn't in jail. The drive to Cincinnati took 2 hours. Jack spent the time thinking about what he was going to do when he found Delaney and Calder. The smart play was to call the police and let them handle it. But the police had already shown they weren't interested in pursuing this case aggressively. Danny was waiting in the parking lot of a strip mall when Jack arrived. He pointed to a coffee shop called Bean there, done that across the street. They're still inside. Been talking for about an hour. Jack could see them through the window. Delaney looked thinner than he remembered, her blonde hair shorter. Calder was a tall man in his 30s with the kind of artificial charm that Jack had learned to distrust on sight. "What's the plan?" Danny asked. "I'm going to have a conversation with them." "That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan I've got." Jack crossed the street and entered the coffee shop. Delaney saw him coming and her face went white. She started to stand, but Jack was already at their table. "Hello, Delaney." Calder looked confused. "Who's this guy?" "Jack Kincaid, Brooke's brother. The one who's been looking for you." Delaney found her voice. "Jack, I can explain everything." "I bet you can." Jack pulled out an empty chair and sat down uninvited. "Why don't you start with why you attacked my brother and then ran off with a convicted felon?" Calder's expression hardened. "You need to back off, friend." Jack looked at him with the flat stare he'd perfected during his Army years. "I'm not your friend, and you're not part of this conversation." "Actually, he is," Delaney said. "Calder and I are engaged." Jack almost laughed. "Engaged? You're still married to Brooks. Or did you forget that part when you were planning your new life? Brooks and I are getting divorced. I've already filed the papers." "Funny thing about that. I checked with the courthouse this morning. No divorce papers have been filed in Briar Ridge." Delaney's composure cracked slightly. "I filed them in Cincinnati. It's complicated because of the residency requirements. What's complicated is that you attacked my brother with a weapon and then fled the state. That's called assault and fugitive from justice." Calder leaned forward. "Look, man, I don't know what your brother told you." But Delaney was defending herself. "The guy has a drinking problem and a violent temper. My brother doesn't drink, and he's never been violent in his life. But you know what I think happened? I think you convinced Delaney to set him up so you two could get access to his money. You don't know what you're talking about." Jack pulled out his phone and showed them the bank statements that Brooks had found. $3,000 transferred to Calder Briggs over the past 2 months. "Want to explain that?" Delaney stared at the phone screen. "Those are private financial matters between Calder and me." "Private? You were using your husband's money to pay another man. That's called theft. I was helping Calder get back on his feet after prison. There's nothing illegal about that. There's when you're using stolen money to do it. And there's definitely something illegal about the fake passport you tried to use at the airport yesterday." Calder stood up abruptly. "We don't have to listen to this." "Sit down," Jack said quietly. "We're not done talking." Something in Jack's tone made Calder hesitate. The man was used to intimidating people through charm and manipulation, not direct confrontation. Delaney tried a different approach. "Jack, I know you're angry, but you don't understand the whole situation. Brooks has been having psychological problems. He's been paranoid, accusatory. I was scared for my safety and Mason's safety. Scared enough to take $3,000 and run away with a con artist. Calder isn't a con artist. He made some mistakes in the past, but he's changed." Jack looked at Calder. "Tell her about the credit cards you opened using her name as a reference. Tell her about the fake IDs in your storage unit." Calder's face flushed. "You broke into my storage unit? I didn't have to break in. You left it unlocked." Jack turned back to Delaney. "Did you know your boyfriend has been committing credit fraud using your information? Did you know that makes you an accessory?" "That's not true." Jack pulled out a piece of paper that Danny had given him a copy of one of Calder's credit applications. "Delaney Hoyt, owner of Hoyt Consulting Services, Ohio. Listed as employment reference on 3 separate applications. Want to tell me about your consulting business, Delaney?" She stared at the paper without speaking. "There is no consulting business," Jack continued. "Just like there are no divorce papers and no threat from Brooks. This was all a setup to get access to my nephew and my uncle's trust fund." Calder was edging toward the exit. Jack stood up and blocked his path. "Where are you going?" "We're just getting to the interesting part. Like why you have children's clothes in your storage unit. Planning a trip with someone's 8-year-old. You're crazy." "Am I?" "Because from where I'm sitting, It looks like you and Delaney were planning to take Mason and disappear. Maybe claim that Brooks was unfit, get custody, and then access the trust fund for his care. That's kidnapping and fraud, among other things. Delaney finally spoke up. We weren't going to hurt Mason. I'm his mother. I have a right to take him if I think he's in danger. From his father, who's never raised a hand to anyone in his life. The same father you put in the hospital with a coffee mug. Jack sat back down and looked at both of them. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come back to Briar Ridge with me and explain to the police exactly what you've been planning. You're going to return every penny you stole from Brooks. And you're going to stay away from Mason. Calder laughed nervously. Or what? Or I'm going to call the Cincinnati police right now and tell them exactly where to find a wanted fugitive and a parole violator who's been committing credit fraud. Jack pulled out his phone and started dialing. Before he could finish, Delaney reached across the table and grabbed his wrist. Wait, what do you want? I want the truth. All of it. And I want it on record. Jack looked around the coffee shop. It was mostly empty, just a few customers reading newspapers and working on laptops. He turned on his phone's voice recorder and placed it on the table. Start talking. Delaney stared at the phone for a long moment before she began speaking. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It started about 6 months ago. I was lonely and frustrated with Brooks. He never wanted to do anything, go anywhere. We were stuck in the same routine every day. So you started cheating on him. I started talking to people online. Just chatting, nothing serious. That's how I met Calder. Jack looked at Calder, who was fidgeting with his coffee cup. Let me guess. He told you he was a successful businessman who could show you a better life. He said he was starting a consulting company. He needed help with the administrative side, someone he could trust. And you believed him. Delaney's voice got defensive. Calder is smart and ambitious. Everything Brooks isn't. He made me feel like I could be more than just a mechanic's wife in a small town. So you started stealing money to help him. It wasn't stealing. It was investing in our future. Calder said he just needed some startup capital, and he'd pay it back with interest. Jack turned to Calder. How much of that is true? Calder shrugged. Most of it. I didn't need startup capital. For credit fraud and identity theft. For legitimate business opportunities. The credit thing was just temporary to establish business credit. Using fake information. Using creative interpretations of existing information. Jack shook his head. You're a con artist, and she's your mark. How long did you think you could keep her believing your lies? They're not lies. I really do care about Delaney. Enough to involve her in felony fraud? Enough to help her abandon her son? Delaney looked stricken. I never wanted to abandon Mason. The plan was to bring him with us. After you destroyed his father and stole his inheritance, Brooks would have been fine. We were going to make it look like an accident, and then... She stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd just admitted. Jack felt the anger he'd been controlling finally break free. Make what looked like an accident. Delaney's hands were shaking. The head injury. We thought if Brooks had a serious accident, something that affected his judgment or memory, I could claim he was unfit to care for Mason. So you planned to hit him harder than you did. No, I never meant to hurt him that badly. When he confronted me about Calder, I panicked. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to run. Calder leaned across the table. Look, this is getting out of hand. Nobody got seriously hurt. Brooks is fine, right? Maybe we can all just walk away from this. Jack looked at him with contempt. My brother has 12 stitches in his head and a concussion. His 8-year-old son watched his mother attack his father and then disappear. You think that's something we can all just walk away from? I'm just saying, maybe there's a way to work this out without involving the police. There is. It's called confession and restitution. Jack turned back to Delaney. What were you planning to do with Mason after you took him? We were going to move to Mexico. Calder has connections there, people who could help us start over, with stolen money and a kidnapped child. Mason is my son. I wasn't kidnapping him. You were planning to take him from his father using false pretenses and a fraudulent custody claim. That's kidnapping. Jack's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and saw that Danny had sent him photos from inside the storage unit. Boxes of fake documents, children's clothes, and what looked like plane tickets that he showed the photos to Delaney. Want to explain these? She looked at the images and started crying. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Calder said we just needed to be patient, build a case against Brooks gradually. But then Brooks found out about the phone calls, and everything fell apart. So you attacked him. I was scared. He was angry, and he was asking questions I couldn't answer. I thought if he was hurt, if he couldn't think clearly for a while, we'd have time to figure out what to do next. Jack stopped the recording and put his phone away. He had what he needed, a full confession to assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and plan kidnapping. Here's what's going to happen, he told them. You're both going to come back to Briar Ridge with me. You're going to turn yourselves into the police and tell them exactly what you just told me. Calder shook his head. I'm not going anywhere with you. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, I'm going to call your parole officer and tell her exactly where you've been and what you've been doing. Violating parole for fraud and conspiracy will put you back in prison for the rest of your original sentence, plus whatever new charges they add. You can't prove anything. Jack held up his phone. I can prove everything. I have your confession on tape, photos of your storage unit, and bank records showing the stolen money. Your choice is to come with me voluntarily or wait for the police to come get you. Delaney wiped her eyes. What about Mason? Can I see him before you go to prison? I don't think that a good idea. He's my son, Jack. Whatever else happens, he's still my son. Jack thought about Mason, who'd been asking every day when his mother was coming home. The kid deserved answers, but he also deserved protection from the truth about what his mother had planned. Maybe someday, when you've served your time and proven that you can be trusted. But not now. They left the coffee shop together, Delaney and Calder walking ahead of Jack like prisoners being escorted to jail, which, Jack reflected, was exactly what they were. The drive back to Briar Ridge took 3 hours. Delaney cried for the first hour, then sat in sullen silence. Calder tried several times to negotiate a deal where he would disappear and never contact Delaney again in exchange for Jack not pressing charges. It's too late for deals, Jack told him. You should have thought about consequences before you decided to destroy my family. When they reached Briar Ridge, Jack drove straight to the police station. Officer Martinez was working the evening shift and looked surprised to see them. Mr. Kincaid? What's going on? I found Mrs. Kincaid and her accomplice. They want to turn themselves in. Accomplice? Jack handed Martinez the recorded confession and the bank statements. They've been planning this for months. Fraud, assault, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. It's all on the recording. Martinez listened to parts of the confession while Jack explained how he'd tracked down Delaney and Calder. By the time he was finished, 2 more officers had arrived and Delaney and Calder were being processed for booking. Mr. Kincaid, I have to ask, how exactly did you obtain this evidence? Some of what you've described might not be admissible in court if proper procedures weren't followed. Jack had expected this question. Everything I did was legal. I hired a private investigator to locate Mrs. Kincaid, which is perfectly within my rights as a concerned family member. When I found her, I confronted her in a public place, and she voluntarily confessed. The bank statements were discovered by my brother in his own home. What about the storage unit? The private investigator observed it from a public area. No laws were broken. Martinez nodded slowly. All right, we'll need formal statements from you and your brother. And you should know that even with this evidence, prosecution isn't guaranteed. Good lawyers might be able to get some of this thrown out. But you'll investigate. Oh yes, we'll definitely investigate. Fraud and conspiracy are serious charges, and if they were really planning to take the child across international borders, Jack left the police station feeling exhausted but satisfied. Delaney and Calder were in custody, their plan was exposed, and Mason was safe. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a start. He called Brooks from the parking lot. It's over. They're in jail. Both of them. And I have their full confession on tape. There was a long pause. How's Mason going to handle this? I don't know, but at least now he'll have the truth instead of lies. Jack drove home to his apartment above the garage. Mason was asleep in the spare room, and Brooks was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in notes. I've been thinking about what happens next, Brooks said. Custody, the house, Mason's future. None of this is going to be easy. No, it's not. But at least we know what we're dealing with now. Jack poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from his brother. Brooks, there's something I need to ask you. Are you going to be able to handle this? Taking care of Mason on your own. dealing with the legal proceedings, everything. Brooks looked up from his notes. I have to be able to handle it. He's my son. I know. But if you need help, I'm going to need a lot of help. But Jack, I want you to know something. Whatever happens with Delaney, whatever the courts decide, Mason and I are going to be okay. We're going to get through this. Jack nodded. His brother was stronger than people gave him credit for. Stronger than Delaney had given him credit for, certainly. What are you going to tell Mason about his mother? The truth. Age-appropriate version, but the truth. He deserves to know that she's sick and that she made some very bad choices. He also deserves to know that none of this was his fault. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two brothers who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. Tomorrow there would be more legal proceedings, more difficult conversations, more challenges to face. But tonight, Mason was safe in his bed, and the people who tried to hurt him were behind bars. For now, that was enough. 3 weeks later, Jack's carefully laid plan began to unfold. Delaney and Calder had been released on bail pending trial, despite Jack's arguments to the prosecutor that they were flight risks. The assistant district attorney, a young woman named Patricia Reeves, seemed more interested in plea bargaining than pursuing maximum sentences. Mr. Kincaid, I understand your frustration, she had told Jack during their meeting. But the reality is that domestic violence cases are difficult to prosecute, especially when the primary witness is a child. Mrs. Kincaid's attorney is claiming this was a moment of panic in an abusive relationship. What about the fraud charges? The fraud charges are more solid, but the amount involved are relatively small. First-time offenders and financial crimes often get probation and restitution orders. Jack had left that meeting knowing that the legal system wasn't going to deliver the justice his family deserved. Delaney and Calder would likely get slapped on the wrist and told not to do it again. That wasn't acceptable, but Jack had learned patience in the Army. You don't attack a position until you've gathered all possible intelligence and prepared for every contingency. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd been gathering intelligence. Now it was time to execute his plan. His first move was to contact Ivy Hoyt. He'd recorded her confession weeks ago, but now he needed her to play one final role in bringing down her sister. Jack caught up with Ivy at the grocery store in Columbus where she worked part-time. Ivy, we need to talk. She looked around nervously. I don't have anything to say to you, Jack. Actually, you do. You're going to call your sister and give her some information. I'm not helping you trap Delaney. Jack pulled out his phone and played back part of her recorded confession. Her voice filled the space between them. She wanted my help staging a domestic violence narrative against Brooks. The goal was to have Brooks involuntarily committed or jailed. Ivy's face went white. You can't use that. I already have. The police have copies. But here's the thing, your cooperation now might convince the prosecutor to go easy on you when charges are filed. What charges? Conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, accessory to assault. Take your pick. Ivy sagged against her shopping cart. What do you want me to do? Call Delaney. Tell her that Brooks is starting to remember things differently about the night she attacked him. Tell her he's been talking to the police about changing his statement. Why would that matter to her? Because if Brooks starts claiming it was self-defense instead of assault, her legal position gets much stronger. She'll think she has a chance to avoid prison. And then what? Then she'll come back to try to manipulate him into changing his story officially. And when she does, I'll be waiting. Jack gave Ivy specific instructions about what to say and when to call. He watched her dial Delaney's number from the store parking lot. Delaney? It's me. I know you don't want to hear from me, but something's happening with Brooks. He's been talking to the police again. No, not about the money stuff. About the night you fought. He's saying he might have grabbed you first, that maybe you were defending yourself. Jack could hear Delaney's sharp questions through the phone, her sudden interest in Brooks' changing memory. I don't know why he's saying it now. Maybe the head injury affected his memory more than the doctors thought. Jack hasn't been around much. He's been working late at the garage most nights. Yeah, Brooks has been alone at the house with Mason. After Ivy hung up, Jack waited. If his psychology was correct, Delaney would need time to think, to plan, but ultimately, she wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to secure her freedom. 2 days later, his patience was rewarded. Danny Reeves called from his surveillance position near Brooks' house. Jack, we've got movement. Delaney just drove past the house twice, checking it out. Now she's parked 3 blocks away. What time is it? Just past midnight. Brooks and Mason should be asleep. Jack was already getting dressed. I'm on my way. Don't lose her. She's not going anywhere. Looks like she's waiting for the right moment to move in. Jack drove through the empty streets of Briar Ridge with his lights off. He parked 2 blocks from Brooks' house and approached on foot through the backyard. Danny was positioned across the street with night vision equipment. She's moving. Danny's voice crackled through Jack's earpiece. Coming up the driveway toward the garage, Jack slipped around the side of the house and saw Delaney using a key to open the garage door. She still had her key to the house, something Brooks hadn't thought to change after the attack. She disappeared inside. Jack waited 5 minutes, then followed her into the garage. He could hear her moving boxes around, searching for something. He positioned himself behind Brooks' workbench and turned on a small flashlight. Find what you're looking for. Delaney spun around, a manila envelope in her hands. In the flashlight beam, her face was pale and startled. Jack, I thought you were working late. I was, but I had a feeling you might show up tonight. I just came to get some things I left behind. Jack stepped closer, keeping the light on her face. What kind of things? Documents that prove your marriage to Brooks was legitimate? Papers that show you have legal claim to the house. She clutched the envelope tighter. These are personal items. Let me guess. Bank account information that Calder doesn't know about. Maybe some insurance policies you forged. Or documentation for the fake consulting business you used to help Calder get credit cards. You don't know what you're talking about. Jack pulled out his phone and started playing Ivy's recorded confession. Ivy's voice filled the garage. She wanted my help staging a domestic violence narrative against Brooks. The goal was to have Brooks involuntarily committed or jailed. Then she'd win custody of Mason, get access to the trust, sell the house, and leave the state with Calder. Delaney stared at the phone in shock. Where did you get that? Your sister told me everything. About the $20,000 you promised her. About the plan to make Brooks look mentally unstable. About how you were going to disappear with Mason and the money. Ivy's lying. Is she? Because the way I see it, you never really loved Brooks. Or Mason. You just saw a future payout. But the house isn't yours. Neither is the kid. Delaney's composure finally cracked. She lunged forward, trying to grab the phone from Jack's hands. Give me that. Jack stepped back, keeping the phone out of her reach. Too late. The police already have copies. She stopped, breathing hard. You set me up. I gave you enough rope to hang yourself. Just like you did to Brooks. Delaney looked around the garage frantically, as if searching for an escape route. Brooks was going to change his statement. Ivy said what I told her to say. Brooks never changed his story because Brooks always told the truth. You attacked him with a broken coffee mug and then ran. That's assault, not self-defense. You can't prove anything. I can prove everything. I have Ivy's confession about your conspiracy. I have bank records showing the money you stole. I have evidence of your storage unit full of fake documents and children's clothes. And now I have you breaking into this house to steal more evidence. Jack watched her face cycle through anger, fear, and desperation. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave those documents right here and walk away. You're going to disappear and never come near my family again. And if I don't, then tomorrow morning, every piece of evidence I have goes to the prosecutor, the family court judge, and the local newspaper. Your bail gets revoked, you go back to jail, and you stay there until trial. Delaney set the envelope on Brooks' workbench. Her hands were shaking. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You lost the moment you decided to hurt my brother. She walked toward the garage door, then turned back. You think you're so smart, Jack, but you don't understand what you've destroyed. Brooks and I could have had a good life together if you hadn't interfered. You destroyed your own life when you decided to steal and lie and hurt people. I just made sure you faced consequences for it. Delaney disappeared into the darkness. Jack waited until he heard her car start and drive away before picking up the envelope she'd left behind. Inside were property deeds, insurance documents, and what looked like forged power of attorney papers that would have given her control over all of Brooks' assets. He called Danny on his radio. Did you get all that? Every word. The audio quality is perfect. Good. Send copies to the prosecutor first thing in the morning. The next morning, Jack sat in his apartment above the garage with copies of Ivy's recorded confession and the bank records showing the transfers to Calder. He also had the documents Delaney had tried to steal from the garage, forged power of attorney papers and property deeds that would have given her complete control over Brooks' assets. He made 3 phone calls. The first was to Patricia Reeves at the prosecutor's office. Ms. Reeves, this is Jack Kincaid. I have additional evidence in the Delaney Kincaid case that I need to deliver to you immediately. What kind of evidence? A recorded confession from her accomplice admitting to conspiracy to commit fraud, bank records showing systematic theft, and documentation proving she was planning to forge legal papers to steal my brother's property. There was a pause. Can you be here in an hour? I'm on my way. His second call was to Judge Margaret Fleming, who handled family court cases in Briar Ridge. Jim Morrison had recommended contacting her directly about the custody issues. Your Honor, this is Jack Kincaid. I'm calling about an urgent child custody matter involving my nephew, Mason Kincaid. What's the nature of the emergency, Mr. Kincaid? His mother has been involved in a conspiracy to commit fraud and kidnapping. I have evidence that she was planning to take him out of the country illegally. I need to file for emergency guardianship. I can see you this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Bring all your documentation. His third call was to Danny Reeves in Cincinnati. Danny, I need you to keep eyes on Calder Briggs. Things are about to get hot here, and I have a feeling he's going to run. Already on it. He's been packing boxes all morning. Looks like he's getting ready to move out of his apartment. Jack delivered the evidence to the prosecutor's office, then drove straight to the family courthouse. Judge Fleming reviewed Ivy's confession, the bank statements, and photos from the storage unit. Mr. Kincaid, this is very serious. Has Mrs. Kincaid had any contact with the child since her arrest? No, Your Honor, but she tried to break into the family home last night to steal documents. I believe she's planning another attempt to take Mason. I'm granting you emergency temporary guardianship effective immediately. We'll schedule a full hearing within 10 days, but for now, you have legal authority to protect this child. Jack felt relief wash over him. Mason was safe, legally protected from any attempt by Delaney to claim him. That afternoon, the dominoes began to fall exactly as Jack had planned. At 3:15 p.m., Columbus police arrested Ivy Hoyt at her workplace on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. The grocery store manager called Jack an hour later. Ivy had asked to use his name as a character reference on her employment application months ago. She kept saying she didn't know this would happen, the manager told Jack. Kept asking if someone could call her lawyer. At 4:30 p.m., Danny called from Cincinnati with an update on Calder. Your boy made a run for it, loaded up his car, and headed west on I-74. But here's the thing. I tipped off his parole officer about 30 minutes before he left. There's a bolo out for him now. Violating parole, failing to report, fleeing the jurisdiction. He's looking at serious time, even if they can't make the fraud charges stick. At 6:45 p.m., Officer Martinez called Jack directly. We got her. Delaney Kincaid was picked up at a motel outside of Dayton. She had a fake passport, $7,800 in cash, and a bus ticket to Miami. From there, she probably would have caught a flight to Mexico. What's she saying? Nothing. Lawyered up the minute they put the cuffs on her. But with the evidence you provided, she doesn't have much room to negotiate. Jack hung up the phone and drove to Brooks' house to deliver the news. His brother was sitting on the front porch with Mason, helping the kid with homework in the fading daylight. It's over, Jack told them. All of them are in custody. Brooks looked up from Mason's math worksheet. All of them. Ivy's in jail in Columbus. Delaney's in jail in Dayton. And Calder's on the run with every cop in Ohio looking for him. Mason looked confused. Mom's in jail. Jack sat down on the porch steps. Your mom made some very bad choices, buddy. She stole money and tried to hurt your dad. Now, she has to face the consequences. Is she coming back? Not for a long time. Maybe not ever. Mason considered this gravely. At 8 years old, he was learning lessons about trust and betrayal that most kids didn't face until they were adults. Uncle Jack, are you going to take care of me and Dad? Jack looked at his brother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'm going to help take care of both of you. We're family, and family sticks together. 3 days later, Danny called with the final piece of news. They got Calder. Highway Patrol picked him up outside of Kansas City. He was trying to cross into Missouri with a fake driver's license. Federal marshals are bringing him back to face charges in Ohio and 2 other states. Jack felt a deep satisfaction. Every person who had conspired to hurt his family was now behind bars, facing serious prison time. The legal system had finally delivered justice. 6 months later, Jack stood in the kitchen of Brooks' house, watching his brother cook breakfast for Mason. The kid was talking excitedly about a school project on space exploration, his hands moving animatedly as he described the rocket he was building. The legal proceedings were finally over. Delaney had been sentenced to 4 years in prison and would be eligible for parole in 2.5 years if she maintained good behavior. Calder had received a longer sentence, 7 years, for multiple fraud charges in 3 different states. His cooperation in Delaney's case had earned him some consideration, but his extensive criminal history worked against him. Mason had been in counseling to help him understand what had happened to his family. Dr. Sarah Chun, a child psychologist in Columbus, had helped him process his feelings about his mother's actions and his father's recovery. The kid was resilient, but he needed professional help to work through his anger and confusion. "Uncle Jack, do you want to see my rocket?" Mason held up a model made from cardboard tubes and painted silver. "That's pretty impressive. What kind of fuel does it use?" "It's just a model. But if it was real, it would use liquid oxygen and hydrogen. That's the most efficient combination for space travel." Brooks smiled at Jack over Mason's head. The kid was smart, curious, and surprisingly well-adjusted considering everything he'd been through. After breakfast, Jack drove Mason to school while Brooks got ready for work. His brother had returned to his job at the county garage and was back to his normal schedule. The physical injuries had healed completely. Though Jack suspected the emotional scars would take longer to fade, Jack had applied for and received legal guardianship of Mason, though Brooks remained his primary caretaker. The arrangement gave Jack the authority to make decisions about Mason's welfare if something happened to Brooks, and it blocked any future attempts by Delaney to regain custody. The trust fund remained untouched, growing in value until Mason turned 18. Jim Morrison had helped them establish an additional college fund using money that Brooks had recovered from Calder's accounts. Mason would be able to attend any university he wanted without worrying about the cost. The garage. Jack found a note that someone had slipped under the front door during the night. It was from Ivy Hoyt. "Jack, I wanted you to know that I'm moving to California. I got a job with my cousin's landscaping business. I know you don't trust me, and I don't blame you, but I want you to know that I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I was just trying to help my sister, and I didn't understand what she was really planning. I'm sorry for the lies I told and the trouble I caused. Please tell Brooks and Mason that I hope they can be happy." Ivy. Jack crumpled up the note and threw it away. Ivy's apology was too little and too late, but at least she was removing herself from their lives. That was probably the best outcome anyone could hope for. Around noon, his phone rang. It was Danny Reeves calling from Columbus. "Jack, I thought you want to know. The Cincinnati police picked up 2 more victims of Calder's romance scams. One of them lost almost $30,000. The feds are looking at additional charges." "Good. The longer he stays in prison, the better. There's something else. Delaney's been trying to contact reporters from prison. She wants to tell her side of the story, claims she was a victim of Calder's manipulation." Jack felt his jaw tighten. "What kind of reporters?" "Local news stations, mostly. So far, none of them are interested. Domestic violence cases don't usually generate much media attention unless there's a celebrity involved. What if they do get interested? Then you deal with it the same way you dealt with everything else. You tell the truth and let the facts speak for themselves." That evening, Jack had dinner with Brooks and Mason at their house. It had become a weekly tradition, a way to maintain family connections and check on how they were both doing. After Mason went upstairs to do homework, the brothers talked about the future. "I've been thinking about selling this house," Brooks said. "Too many bad memories." "Where would you go?" "Maybe somewhere closer to your garage. Mason likes staying with you, and it would be easier if we lived in the same neighborhood." Jack had been thinking about the same thing. "Actually, I've been considering expanding the business. Maybe opening a second location, bringing you in as a partner." Brooks looked surprised. I don't know anything about running a business. You know cars and you know people. The business side can be learned. Besides, it would be good for Mason to see his father building something instead of just working for someone else. They talked for another hour about possibilities, plans, dreams that had been put on hold during the crisis, but were now feasible again. It felt good to think about the future instead of dwelling on the past. At 9 o'clock, Jack said goodnight and drove back to his apartment. As he unlocked the door, he thought about Delaney, sitting in a prison cell somewhere, probably still convinced that she'd been the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Jack had learned something important during the months of investigation and legal proceedings. Some people will always see themselves as victims, no matter how much damage they cause to others. Delaney would probably never accept responsibility for the pain she'd inflicted on her own family. But Mason would grow up knowing the truth. He'd know that his father had been betrayed by someone he trusted, and that his uncle had fought to protect him when the people who should have protected him had failed. He'd learned that loyalty and honesty weren't just words, but principles worth defending. Jack pulled out a box from his bedroom closet, old photographs that he'd salvaged from Brooks' house before the police had finished processing it as a crime scene. Most of the pictures showed happier times. Brooks and Delaney's wedding, Mason's early birthdays, family gatherings that had seemed genuine at the time, but he sorted through them carefully, setting aside the ones that showed only Mason and Brooks. Those are worth keeping. The rest, pictures of Delaney alone or with the family, went into a garbage bag. All except one. A photo of Mason as a baby, sleeping in Brooks' arms while Delaney looked on with what had seemed like maternal love. Jack studied her face in the photograph, looking for signs of the deception that had been lurking beneath the surface. But all he could see was a young mother who'd appeared to love her child. Maybe she had loved Mason in her own limited way. Maybe she'd even loved Brooks for a while. But love without character was worthless. Love without loyalty was just sentiment. Jack lit a match and held it to the corner of the photograph. The paper caught fire slowly, curling and blackening as the flames consumed the image of the family that had never really existed. "Forgiveness is for cowards," he said quietly, watching the last of the photograph turn to ash. "We don't forget. We outlast." Outside, it started to rain again. But this time, Jack didn't think of it as a storm. This time, it sounded like the world washing itself clean.